friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Waffle Flowers, Mermaid Mail, and Under the Sea sentiments. So I've stamped out my images in Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my mermaid's skin, and for that I'm using E000, E00, and E11. I'm using the E11 first to lay in a little shadow under her hairline and along the left side of her neck. Since her hair is mostly over on the left side, I figured it would be casting a shadow, and then also on the underside of her arms. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E00 and finish with the E000 as my highlight. Then I'm going to take R11 and R20 to give her some rosy cheeks. Just do a little oval with the R20 first, and then I'm going to blend out the edges of that with the R11. I wanted to give her some fun hair color, so I decided to go with purple. And I'm going to use V20, V22, and V25 to start. I am doing a quick layer with that V20 just to get some initial color laid in, and also to kind of map out where I want the darkest colors to go once I get to the roots. Then I'm going to come in with my next darkest shade, the V22, and add that in a sweeping motion to mimic the way that her hair has been drawn. I'm going to concentrate that closest to her face and leave the ends nice and light. So once I have that laid in, I'm going to darken that up even further with the V25. I'm being really careful to use the tip of my marker so I can get some nice thin streaks. And like I said, I'm concentrating that darker color around the crown of her head and then having less of those streaks as I get toward the ends. I want to keep the hair that's behind her head nice and dark as well. And then I'm going to come in and color in the reverse. So now I'm working with the V22 and just kind of flicking over the edges of the V25 and adding a bit more shading at the roots. And then I'm coming in with the V20. And then I wanted to add just a couple touches of some darker strands to add a bit more depth. So I'm going to take the V28. I'm going to use this one really sparingly, just do nice thin little strokes. Again, keeping it concentrated at the crown of her head. I'm not going to bring these all the way to the end, but just kind of darken that up around her face. And then I'm also going to use these shades to color in one of the little plant life that's down at the bottom. I'm starting with the V25 as my darkest, and then I'm going to blend that out with the V22. I decided to skip the V20 on this completely because I wanted her hair to kind of stand out and be different than anything else. So I'm going a little bit darker with this. And now I'm coming in with that V28 and just going down the line in the center to create that little extra bit of depth. And then I'm also going to color in the long skinny fish with these shades. I started with the V28 and now I'm blending out with the V25, and then I'll use the V22. My V22 was getting a little bit drippy, so I just pulled the other cap off to equalize the pressure in the barrel, and then added a little V20 for the face. The blend wasn't really great because that V22 was so wet that it kind of pushed the other colors down. So I just went over that with a second layer really quickly. And this time I added just a touch of that V22 to the face so that would have a little bit of dimension as well, and blended out with the V20. Then I'm moving on to some hot pinks, and I'm using RV13, RV14, and RV17. using that RV17 and adding a little shadow down at her waistline, and then also bringing that up on the left hand side again because her hair is kind of swooped over to the left. I figured that would be the side to cast the most shadow. Then I blended up with the RV14 and finished with the RV13. And then I'm going to do this first fish here. I'm going to do this one in hot pink and orange. I'm doing a rainbow theme card again, but I'm going to swap out some of the typical colors. Instead of red, I'm doing hot pink. And instead of like a regular blue, I'm going to do turquoise just to kind of mix things up a bit, and also using this more dusty purple tone rather than a more vibrant indigo. I'm actually guest designing with Waffle Flower today for their current challenge, and that is to create a rainbow themed card. So I am going to have a link to that in the description bar below and all the information on my blog post. But I decided to do this little coral and these hot pinks as well. And I'm just adding that shading with the RV17 on the left hand side again. And using the very tip of my marker so I can get really small little lines in there so that I can fit all three shades. So then I'm using the RV14 to blend that out. Because it's such a small area, you don't really have to work at it very hard. The colors are just going to blend on their own. But I will come in with that RV13 as my highlight shade and just fill in all the rest of that white space. For my oranges, I'm going to use YR04, YR07, and YR09. And I'm going to start with the YR09 and lay in a little bit of darkness on both the left and right of each of those little stripes, and pull the highlight toward the center with the YR07, and then filling in with the YR04. I'm also going to color in the two starfish with these shades, both this larger one and then the teeny tiny one that's just to the left of it. So on the starfish, I actually am doing the shading just a little bit different. I wanted it to kind of accentuate the shape of it and give it a bit of lift. So I just kind of changed the direction and added the shadows like on the underside of each of those sections. And then for the tiny one, it was just quick and easy. So for my yellows, I'm using Y13, Y15, and Y17. I'm going to do the little seashell that's in her hair, kind of as if it were a crown. And then I'm also going to do this angelfish, and I'm just adding the shading on the underside and then also on the underside of the fins. And then blending up with the Y15 and then adding that Y13 for a nice highlight at the top. And then I'm also going to color in one of the little plants at the bottom, this kind of feathery looking plant. So I'm just doing the Y17 on the right hand side for the three that are a little bit tipped to the right, and then on the left for the one that's on the bottom left. And then blending out with the Y15 and then finishing with the Y13 once again. Then I'm going to move on to my greens, and I'm not going to use a ton of green in the coloring because my background is going to be green as well, so I didn't want to get too crazy, but I did want to do a two-tone effect on the mermaid's tail. I wanted it to transition from green to turquoise. So I picked YG11, YG13, and YG17. There wasn't enough definition on the end of that, so I did pull in the G46 to darken that up. I blended that out in the reverse, and then I went back and added another layer of that G46 and just continued to go over that until I had a level of saturation that I was happy with. and then I kind of let it just fade off at the ends so that I could smooth that into the aqua when I get there. But before I do that, I did want to color in this tiny little plant. So I just put the G46 on the right hand side, blended out with the YG17 and the YG13. So now I will do the transition. I'm going to start at the top this time with my darkest aqua shade. I'm using BG32, BG45, and BG49. So I laid in the BG49 first and blended out with the BG45, then brought in the BG32 and realized that I needed an even lighter transition. So I brought in BG11 to bridge the gap into the green. And then once again, I went over that with a second layer to just make sure that everything would be really smooth and I'd get a seamless blend. Then I'm going to color in the little manta ray with these same shades. I've mentioned this before, but I like to pull a color palette together on a card by having each color represented in at least two places. Just really draws your eye around the scene. So I started with the BG49 on the upraised fins and then colored with the BG45 and the BG32, and then I felt like there wasn't enough definition on the face, so I decided to go back over the image with the second layer and just add a bit more depth there. So I'm blending back out in the reverse once again, and I wanted to leave the belly white, so I'm going to bridge that gap with a little bit of that BG11. And then I'm also going to color in the tiny clamshell. And I did squeeze all four shades onto that as well, so it had a nice highlight at the top. So I left the little leaves in her hair until the end. Wanted to make sure that her hair was completely dry. Plus I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to do it green, but in the end I decided to go for it because I figured it kind of looked like seaweed. So I went back to my YG17 for that. I did skip around a bit because I didn't want things to look too flat, so I decided to bring in the YG13 as well so that some of them would get a little bit lighter as it went toward the tips especially. So I just quickly colored those in with a single layer. And then I grabbed my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen to go over the eyes of my mermaid and my little fish and just make them nice and bright and shiny again. I think this is such a great finishing touch. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm going to take a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and blend on some cracked pistachio Distress Oxide ink. And I want it to be lightest in the center and then get darker around the edges. So I'm just doing kind of like a large oval shape, just doing a little circular motion with that blending tool. And then I'm going to bring in my next shade, which is Lucky Clover. And this one I'm going to pull from the four sides and bring toward that center. And I will overlap just a little bit so that, you know, it ends up having a nice blend once I go back and smooth everything out. So I'm just going to continue moving my little piece of paper around that's keeping my fingers out of the ink and mainly keeping my fingers from lifting up the ink. Sometimes the ink will lift up and leave fingerprints behind. So trying to avoid that just by using the scrap of paper that I die cut my images out of. So once I have my Lucky Clover laid in, I'm going to go back to the cracked pistachio and go over the transition, just making sure to keep that center nice and light. I don't want to really go over that again, at least not too many times, or it'll get a lot darker. Then I'm going to bring in my last color, which is Pine Needles. This is a nice deep green, and I'm going to only keep this one to the very outside edges. I just want it to really create that nice depth on the outside edge. I keep saying depth, you know, in this video in all my videos because that's what just brings your coloring or your backgrounds to life. Having those darkest darks and those lightest lights is what just creates those dynamics that make something really stand out. So once I have everything blended on, I'm going to add a little bit of water in the top corner of my Waffle Flower mini media mat. And then I'm going to pick that up with a small paintbrush and do some splatter effect on the background. I'm going to let that soak into the paper for a few seconds, and then I'll grab a paper towel and kind of lift up that color with that. I'm going to repeat the process one more time because I didn't get as much at the top as I wanted. And then I'm going to bring in some Lawn Fawn liquid stardust. I'm going to give that a really good shake because all the sparkles do go down to the bottom, so then I'll squirt a little bit out on the other side of my mat. I'm going to pick that up and do some splatter effect as well. This is pretty subtle, especially when you're doing these teeny tiny drops like I am, but when you tip the card into the light, it really does add a nice little bit of sheen. Then I'm going to also press on some pine needles and pick that up and do some more splatter just so I get a nice bubbly look on this ocean backdrop. Once I have everything splattered the way that I want it, I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely. Once it has, I'm going to pop it into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it really lays nicely over the Distress Oxides. Because it is that pigment ink, it just kind of overlays rather than kind of absorbing into the ink like some other inks do. So I stamped Birthday Fishes to You, and then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using MFT's Snow Cone cardstock and then stamping on the inside using Lawn Fawn's Mermaid ink. And I'm stamping the sentiment that says, "Just keep swimming," along with the seahorse, and then that long skinny fish again, and another little plant. I did have to clean off those images since they were brand new. There was like a little bit of residue from the manufacturing that was keeping the ink from stamping cleanly, so I cleaned that off and then stamped that down a few times to make sure that I would have a nice impression. And this ink does even out a bit as it dries back, so that will get a little bit more crisp. So now I'm ready to adhere my card front to my card base. So I'm using some Tombow Mono multi-glue to line that up with the four corners, make sure everything is nice and straight, and then press that smooth to adhere it down. And then I can bring in my images. I always like to start with my largest image first, so I'm going to take my mermaid and add some liquid glue to the back of her, making sure to get all her little bits so that they don't pop up on the card and get caught in an envelope when you're trying to insert it. So just make sure that she is adhered nice and strong down to that card base. And I also like that this liquid glue gives you that little bit of time to adjust things before it dries permanent, so you can just slide things into position if you didn't have them quite right the first time. So I'm also going to be adding some of these little greeneries and sea plants down at the bottom. And for those, I'm actually going to adhere them in rainbow order just so that the theme is really represented on this card. So next I'm going to add this little green one, kind of like skipping around here, but once I have them all in place, you'll see that rainbow. So next to the green one, I have the yellow plant, and then I have the orange starfish. It's going to go between the coral and the yellow plant. And you can see what I mean there by that wiggle room as I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want that starfish placed and, you know, just the spacing of all of those little plants. So then I have that little turquoise clamshell, so I'll add some liquid glue to the back of that and place that between the green plant and the purple one, so you have that rainbow order represented there. I'm going to add a tiny little bead of glue to the mermaid's hand so I can add the little starfish to that. And then I'll add my little manta ray, and that's going to go right above that sentiment, really accenting it and drawing your eye to that. And then I have the little purple fish, and that one is going to go beneath the sentiment. So I just have my last two little fish left. So the pink and orange one is going to go up at the top, and then the yellow one will go beneath that. So those are almost in descending rainbow order there. If you slide over to the far right and grab the green of the mermaid's tail. Not quite in rainbow order, but almost. So then I'm going to take some little droplets here. I think these are from Pretty Pink Posh. So I'm just sprinkling a few onto my work surface. I have some larger ones and some smaller ones. And I'm going to take some Ranger Multimedia Matte to adhere these. I find that this glue works really great for things that are going through the mail. And since these are so raised up beyond the rest of the surface of the card, I want to make sure that they really are secured well. So I'm just working in little groups, adding a few little dabs of glue and then picking up the little droplets and setting them into place. And I know that the glue looks white behind those droplets right now, but it will actually dry completely clear. So you'll be able to see, you know, the same color of that cardstock behind, or the ink blended cardstock behind. I'm going to add two more of these little droplets, one larger and one smaller, to kind of fill in that space at the bottom on the area near that little purple fish. And then I'm going to grab some of my favorite embellishment, which is Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to add a little bit here and there on all of the fish. A little bit on the fins, and then kind of the bottom of the body. On the manta ray, I did it on the upraised fins and tail. Also put it on the little purple fish, and I'm going to add a little bit to the starfish and the little clamshell that's in the mermaid's hair, and then a tiny little bit to each of the plants as well. So there's going to be lots of glitter on this card, but that's okay. It is a mermaid scene, so of course there needs to be glitter. So I'm adding it to the coral, and I almost forgot to add it to the mermaid's tail. I started to reach for that cap, but then I realized, oh, of course I need glitter on her tail because it's going to help it look like scales. So I'm running that down the right hand side and then kind of just swirling it with the nib so that it kind of disperses toward the left. And then also decided to dot in a few of those seaweed strands in her hair. Not all of them, just a few here and there for some extra sparkle. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see all of that sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. Check out the Waffle Flower Challenge in the description box below. And if you're interested in any of the products I used today, you'll find them listed there as well. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.